Welcome back to the Theology of Business podcast. I'm your host, Darren Shearer, author of The Marketplace Christian and Marketing Like Jesus. And this is a show that helps marketplace Christians to partner with God in business to help you make disciples of your coworkers, your company, and your industry. You get more teachings and interviews like the one you're about to hear at theologyofbusiness.com. This interview with Amy Sherman you're about to hear on the subject of public discipleship in the marketplace was recorded in the midst of the violent race riots that were happening in Charlottesville, Virginia, just a few weeks ago from the time of this recording. And in fact, Amy lives in Charlottesville. The racism and hatred we saw on display during those protests reminds us just how much work the people of God need to do to accurately represent Jesus to our world. And as I record this, just a few weeks later, my own city of Houston, Texas, has been faced with a different kind of adversity. We were just hit with Hurricane Harvey, as you're probably aware, if you've been watching the news lately, which has earned the title of the costliest natural disaster in the history of the United States. Within just a few days, our city was pounded by trillions of gallons of rain. The damage has indeed been catastrophic. Tens of thousands of homes and hundreds of thousands of automobiles were destroyed in our city alone. And many other cities and towns along the Texas coast were also devastated by the storm, and especially by the flooding. Whether it's making phone calls for fundraising, helping with demolition in people's flooded homes, serving food at a local shelter, or any of the other countless jobs that need to be filled right now, the people in our city are so desperate for help that they don't care who provides it. As I write this, I actually have an evacuee's cat sitting next to me because this particular cat needed a temporary home because her home got totally destroyed. And I can still feel the sheetrock particles in my throat from helping to remove wet sheetrock from a family's home that had water all the way to the ceiling of their living room. It's all hands on deck here in Houston. All 12,000 members of the Texas National Guard were activated to bring relief to our city and to other areas along the Texas coast. And for the first time in any church I've ever attended, this past Sunday, my pastor asked the entire congregation of more than 1,000 people to raise their right hands and say, "I am hereby ordained as a pastor in the Church of Jesus Christ." I encourage you that no matter what kind of work you're doing for the Lord, whether it's helping people who have been devastated by a natural disaster, building racial unity in your community, selling products and services that reveal the glory of God, and no matter how much you get paid for doing it, or even if you get paid for doing it, that work matters to the Lord. You may be the only person who can reveal the love and message of Jesus to those people you work with and serve. And that place where you're serving and creating value during the week is the best place to share that message. I want to ask you to do something right now that you may have never done before. Whether you're driving in your car, walking the dog, or sitting in your couch listening to this, raise your right hand and repeat this after me. I am hereby ordained and activated as a minister of the love and message of Jesus Christ to those around me. And you might not be taking me seriously right now, but I want you to really do it. Raise your right hand and repeat this after me. I am hereby ordained and activated as a minister of the love and message of Jesus Christ to those around me. Like the Texas National Guard, you are hereby activated to respond to the needs around you as the hands and feet of Jesus. And like the congregation at my church as of Sunday, you are hereby ordained as a minister of the love and message of Jesus Christ to everyone you meet, and especially to those you work with every day. And if you'll accept this challenge to reach 5 people in your workplace with the love and message of Jesus Christ by the year 2020, I invite you to make this commitment at love2020workplace.com/commit. That's love2020workplace.com/commit. On today's episode, we'll be discussing public discipleship in the marketplace, and we're joined by Dr. Amy Sherman. Amy is a senior fellow at the Sagamore Institute and was named by Christianity Today in 2012 as one of the 50 evangelical women most influencing the American church and culture. She's the author of 6 books and over 80 articles in periodicals. And her most recent book is Kingdom Calling: Vocational Stewardship for the Common Good, which was recently honored as Christianity Today's Book of the Year in the Christian Living category. She holds a BA from Messiah College and an MA and PhD from the University of Virginia in Charlottesville, which is where she currently resides. And certainly, as we were talking before the interview, just praying that God would just bring healing to the situation and the racial division that's manifesting there and really indicative of what's happening in our nation. And so maybe we'll hear a little bit about that in this talk. But I heard Amy speak last year at the Faith and Works Summit in Dallas. And she's one of the few people I've heard who are talking about discipleship as a means of influencing institutions and beyond just talking about private spirituality matters like doing your work as worship and working with integrity and applying the golden rule, all of which are certainly extremely important. But in this interview, she's going to share the need for both personal discipleship and public discipleship so we can make an impact on our workplaces and ultimately on the cultures. So welcome to the Theology of Business podcast, Amy.
Hey, thanks so much for having me.
How would you define, first of all, I'm going to ask you about public discipleship, but how do you define discipleship?
Yeah, I think that essentially discipleship is about living in the kingdom of God under the reign of Jesus and seeking to please him in everything. I believe there's a phrase about that in the first chapter of Colossians. So it's this very holistic, whole life discipleship, conforming more and more over time with the help of the Spirit to the character of Jesus Christ. But not only that, also conforming to the priorities and to the passions of Christ. Because all of those things, the character, the priorities, the passions, all of those dimensions, I think, are encompassed in the idea of our fundamental calling to be image bearers of God. So that's how I see discipleship. It's about this alignment of glad-hearted life under the reign of Christ in the kingdom of God.
I love that. So with that as our understanding of what is, because I think it's good that you define that, because when somebody hears the term discipleship and being a disciple and disciple making can sound a little bit lofty and kind of super spiritual, but I like how you broke that down for us. It's the character of it's being image bearers of the character of Jesus, as well as embodying the priorities and the passions of Jesus. So now, what would you say is the difference between personal discipleship and what you call public discipleship?
Personal discipleship is this sort of, I would say, more of the focus on the character of Christ, the development of personal holiness, the quest that we have through our spiritual disciplines, and again, with the help of the empowerment of the Spirit, to grow in Christ-likeness, to seek to display the fruit of the Spirit, more and more. And this, I think, has been typically the primary focus of much of our churches, right? We focus on helping people learn how to pray, learn how to study the Bible, and then there's a lot of teaching about the practical application of those things in your personal life. So, personal discipleship is about living rightly in your relationships, your marriage, your financial stewardship, your sexual behavior, et cetera, et cetera. And all of that is obviously really good, really needed, perfectly biblical. But not only are we to conform to the character of Christ, but also to really share in the agenda of Christ, in the passion of Christ, in the work of Christ. And so you study the Bible and you see Jesus' passion for justice, his passion for righteousness, his passion for the poor and the vulnerable. It's his passion for beauty. And so we can't say that personal piety is the totality of what discipleship means. It's not the totality of what bearing God's image in the world is. But because I think so much of the church has focused on discipleship in this very sort of privatized and personal way, folks like me and others have decided, we need to sort of stick the adjective public in front of the word discipleship to help people remember that this practical living out of your faith is something that needs to be done in every area of your life. So not only your marriage, but your life in the marketplace, your life in the workplace, your life as a citizen, as a neighbor. And I think that when we really understand, a phrase like Jesus' call to seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, I think if we really understand what that means, we'll do a better job of recognizing both this personal and this public dimension of discipleship.
Beautiful. It almost seems to me, Amy, like there's some confusion about what is the image of God, and usually when I hear Imago Dei, the image of God and how we're called to live that out in the workplace, the focus is not on Jesus. The focus is on God in the garden, and how God created work before the fall, and so work is a good thing. And so it is enough to be like Adam pre-fall, and the fact that you were just going about doing your work, and that to tack on anything else in addition to that, it would seem to some that you are devaluing the value of work unto God, that it's somehow less of an act of worship, that you are you're naming the animals, or you're mopping the floor or something like that. But it sounds like you're saying, let's realize that the image of God has been revealed in Jesus, and that whatever Jesus' priorities and the way that he went about his life is more of what you mean, besides just doing a good job at work. Is that right?
Well, yeah. I mean, I think it's helpful to think about, in a sense, the story of God, the work of God, and that story is a story, from creation through fall to redemption and on to consummation. Sort of the grand narrative vision of who God is and what God is doing. And if we have that as the sort of big context, that there's this big story, and the story of my life is to fit into that big story, that's sort of what I'm here for, then it's really helpful to think about, okay, well, that story is a story of righteousness. God is a righteous God. And the most helpful definition I've ever heard of the word righteousness was when I read a book, and the author said, just understand righteousness as set rightness. Righteousness is everything being the way God intended to be. So you have the story of creation, and everything is the way God intended it to be. The relationship between God and persons was the relationship of people to their own sort of psychological psyches was right. The relationship between people was right, and the relationship between people and God's creation was right. And so this God of righteousness establishes a world of righteousness, a world. This concept, I think, is also well communicated by the Hebrew idea of shalom, and that righteousness is all pervasive in at an individual level and at a sort of systemic or institutional level. When we say that everything was right, in God's original creation. We mean that relationships were right. We mean that, everything was working the way that it was supposed to work. And through the fall, you see the corruption of everything falling apart. In the redemption, you see Jesus coming and saying, I'm here to make all things right once again. I'm here to set things right once again. And then you have this vision in the scriptures of what life is going to be like when Christ returns, and we see the fulfillment of his kingdom, where once again all things will be made right. And so when you have this sort of really robust vision of this set rightness, then I think what you understand is that there are really important lessons and implications for your life in the world, personally and publicly, that sort of are revealed in each of those chapters of the narrative. So we learn something about what it means to be an image bearer in the story of creation, but we also learn something about what it means to be an image bearer through the horror of the fall, and through the glory of the redemption, and through the consummate beauty of the doctrine of how everything is going to be in the new heaven and the new earth. So it's kind of like you have to have the really big picture in your mind, I think, in order to really understand this notion of what it means to bear the image. So to get back to your point, it is about bearing God's image and bearing Jesus's image, but it's kind of more. It's about understanding our vocational role in this whole big story.
Right. And being able to frame it in such a way, and that seems to be the real challenge. I mean, people ask me, how do I articulate for myself the way that my story, the way that my work fits in? How is it ministry? Does it mean that I go and I, pass out tracts to my coworkers? And there's a lot of questions about that. But what I hear you saying is viewing your work as a part of God's redemptive story. And you shared several amazing examples at the conference. What would be an example of cultivating creational intent? That's the first of the threefold expression of vocational image bearing that you teach.
Yeah. So the verbs that I like to use are cultivating, restoring, and imagining. And as you said, the first one is this notion of paying attention to the doctrine of creation, that part of the story. And I think we work for to cultivate the creational intent of the sector that we're in. So in other words, we're not just talking about being a good, honest, employee of a place, or being a kind boss. Those character things are really important, but understanding the nature of the work itself is also really important. And understanding, okay, I'm in the healthcare sector, or I'm in engineering, or I'm in business. Well, what is sort of what was the purpose of that? God created all things, including all vocations, including all institutions, including all parts of the market. So what does that mean? And when I think about that, a gal that I got to know a little bit while I was writing my book. She's an architect named Jill Kurtz, and she's pretty young. She's probably just recently turned 30 or so. And for her, as an architect, she kind of looks at the scriptures and says, okay, if I'm to take sort of the doctrine of creation seriously, what I see is that God created this beautiful, well-designed world in which there was a harmony between the physical world and the human beings that God put into it. And so as an architect, I'm involved in designing the built environment in which human beings live. And so for her, very practically, what that has looked like is to say, well, if there's supposed to be this harmony, then I need to build buildings that are sort of good for people, right? I need to build buildings that are built in such a way that they're good for the creation. So she actually was the first architecture student at her architecture school who got fully certified in something called LEED certification, which is basically when you learn how to build buildings in a really sort of green-friendly way. But beyond that, what I've appreciated about Jill is that she's also really given thought, I think, to the institutional sector of architecture. And again, thinking about the doctrine of creation, not only do you see harmony as a beauty and harmony as values, but you see this picture of human flourishing. And as an architect, you can contribute to human flourishing, but what if a lot of people or groups or organizations can't really access the talents of architects? And what Jill discovered in going off and working for a good green design firm out on the West Coast was that, this was great. I can pursue my interest in being an architect that builds green-friendly building. But boy, 80% of the world can't afford architectural services. This seems to be a problem with our industrial sector. We've priced ourselves beyond so many people, and there's just lots of folks, communities around the world that could really, use my talents. So she actually left her job, and she and a friend started their own architecture firm, and they have, it's a business model. Obviously they have to make a profit, but they've really tried to make their green design services affordable, so that nonprofit organizations, churches, small businesses, missionary organizations, et cetera, can afford her services. In fact, she calls herself a public interest architect, which I think is
I love that.
A wonderful phrase. So that, I think that for me, that's a great story of how she's just thinking really. She's not sort of saying I need to be a good person. She is saying that I need to be a good person as an architect. I need to be friendly with my coworkers. But she's thinking so much more deeply about the work itself.
Wow. And so she's not only setting the example for other architects, but as their company grows, the company itself and the culture that's put in place is influencing the entire industry and certainly the community around. And when I think about discipleship, I mean, the Great Commission is not just to make disciples of individuals, but of entire nations, right? And so there's every level of organization in between there. And so when I heard you talking about public discipleship, that's what it made me think of. And architectural firms like hers, public interest architects, in the way that truly does disciple entire companies and ultimately I think entire industries. Is that what you're seeing as more people?
Yeah, I think there's the promise of that. Now, in her particular situation as a young woman, she actually is not quite right now as involved in her business because she and her husband have just started their family. But what she has thought about is the institutions that train future generations of architects. And so she's actually gone back to her alma mater and convinced them to allow her to teach this special January term course called Public Interest Architecture. So she's actually sharing her experience and trying to influence the way that institution, I believe it's Kansas State University, how that school of architecture, is training the future architects. So she's understanding that she has both a role to sort of shine her little light, in the sector called architecture through her little firm, but also to shine her little light by going back to a training institution and bringing this perspective to young people. And it's been very well received. In fact, there's actually a student club now on campus where, the students are really trying to promote this idea. They're doing pro bono work for different types of organizations. It's really been very exciting.
I love that. And so that's cultivating creational intent. And then you talk about restoring institutional set rightness. What does that look like?
Yeah. So I think if the cultivating sort of expression relies heavily on thinking about this notion of the implications of the doctrine of creation, the restoring expression takes very seriously the doctrine of the fall and of redemption or restoration. And it's essentially, I think, asking questions about what's wrong. I'm in a particular industry or sector. Where has that become corrupted? We know that the fall was not only about kind of individual people, not following the rules. The fall was this cosmic, comprehensive situation in which corruption sort of is unleashed into the world, and everything gets broken. And so the sectors that we're in get broken. And part of what we're called to do is to be discerning about those places of idolatries and corruption and to call a spade, and to sort of push back against that darkness and try to set things right. Again, going back to this notion that righteousness is this idea of things being set right. And so there's a Hispanic pastor and nonprofit leader in the Philadelphia area, a gentleman named Luis Cortez, and his nonprofit is involved in a variety of things, but one of them is housing and housing finance. And he got into this in part because in their neighborhood, they know a lot of families, and they were seeing this pattern of systemic discrimination against Hispanic families who were sort of wanting to buy homes. And they were facing this systemic discrimination from the housing financing sector. So, for example, a Hispanic home buyer might go into a financial institution with the exact same credit scores and history as a white home buyer, but they would end up with a much higher interest loan. Their homes are much more likely to go into foreclosure. They often are abused by lenders who fail to disclose certain kinds of, additional fees, or to provide, all that legal paperwork, in Spanish as well as in English. And so this poor treatment that he and his staff were seeing, that many Hispanic families of modest means were experiencing in the housing finance sector, made them want to say, this is inequitable, this is an injustice, God is against this. We get to participate in trying to set this right. And so they've done that, I think, in two important ways, what I would call it sort of a retail and a wholesale level. So at the retail level, they have themselves engaged in building homes and in providing housing counseling and finance counseling to several thousand families, actually helping them to find those companies that offered fair and reasonable financing. And so that's making things better for those, 3,000-4,000 families right there. But what Luis Cortez was aware of was that retail effort needed also to be joined with a wholesale sort of effort by which you have to join with other people and really seek a genuine reform at a more systemic level. So he's gotten very active in national policy making on housing finance. He partnered with the University of Notre Dame to produce some scholarly reports that have really compiled the evidence of this discrimination and shine the spotlight on it. And then he was able to get his nonprofit officially certified by the Department of Housing and Urban Development as something called a National Housing Counseling Intermediary. And essentially, without going into a lot of detail about that, that has provided a platform for this organization called Nueva Esperanza that Luis Cortez heads to be a voice working with others to sort of pressure for the needed reforms in that sector in order to set things right so we won't see this inequitable treatment against Hispanic homebuyers.
Wow, such a great example of restoring institutional set rightness when you see an injustice, when you see something that doesn't look like creation. And certainly there are many things, as we talked about earlier, what's going on in Charlottesville and really is representative of what's happening in our nation with the racial division, and acknowledging that is what's happening, but then working toward and really getting a vision of the shalom, the set rightness, the righteousness that characterized the pre-fall. And so then you don't just talk about looking back to creation, but then imagining the work of your sector in the age to come. What does that look like?
Yeah, I think this is in some ways maybe the funnest of the three expressions. You got cultivating, restoring, and then imagining. And just like with cultivating, you're trying to attend to the doctrine of creation. With restoring, you're trying to attend to the notion of the fall, and then the fact that Jesus comes back and says, I'm here to begin to set things right. I'm here to push back the darkness and push in the light. I'm here to do that work of renewal. But then you look to the fulfillment, to the doctrine of the consummation of the kingdom of God, that one day all things truly will be set right, and we will live in this new heaven and this new earth. And to imagine, well, what's architecture going to look like in the New Jerusalem? What's housing going to look like in the New Jerusalem? What's business going to look like in the New Jerusalem? To begin to imagine those things. And my favorite example of that is a guy that I met in Chicago, and he is a home builder. His name is Perry Bigelow, and he was the founder and owner, CEO of a company called Bigelow Homes. He's now retired, and his son is the managing, person right now, day to day, over Bigelow Homes. But when I met with Perry in Chicago and got to actually walk around one of the neighborhoods that his company developed, and actually it was a neighborhood that won his company Builder of the Year, which is a very prestigious award. It was so delightful to listen to him, because essentially what he told me was that, I'm a believer, so I'm in the scriptures, I'm searching the scriptures. Now, these are my words, not his, but, he's a person who's trying to please the Lord in all things, right? Please the Lord in everything. And so he was looking in the scriptures for, what did they teach him about community building? Because in a sense, when he thinks about the product and service that his business provides, at a kind of big picture level, what does he do? Well, he builds neighborhoods. And so he wants to know, well, what does God want neighborhoods to look like? What are neighborhoods going to look like in the New Jerusalem? And you can actually find some good teaching in the Bible about those things. And for him, one of his favorite sort of visions of this is depicted in Zechariah 8, where you have this picture of a coming time when the community will be this place of of safety. Children will be, playing out in the streets, and old people will be kind of like hanging out, chatting together. And for him, Perry wants to ask, what are the things, what are the values and the characteristics of the New Jerusalem? And how can I design my homes and my neighborhoods to try to imagine that, so that to the best of my ability, and to facilitate that. So, I got to walk around this neighborhood, and, it was marked by homes that had these really big front porches and really wide sidewalks and really narrow streets, and the streets all had speed bumps, and there was a lot of green space, common spaces, fountains, benches, gazebos, and all of these things were done very intentionally by Perry, because for him, he's saying, I want the streets to be safe. I want the kids to be able to play in the streets, literally. Let's put the cars behind the homes. I want the old people out jawing with their neighbors. So I'm putting big front porches so the people are there. They can, call out, wave to their neighbor, have a conversation. I'm making the sidewalk, wide, and I'm making the community beautiful and green and pretty, because then people, when the weather's nice, they'll be out and about. They'll be conversing with one another. They'll be enjoying the natural environment. They'll be, doing a game of pickup soccer or, baseball or whatever. And he's doing all these things very, very intentionally, because these kingdom values of safety and of community, really matter to him. Another thing that he does is that he very deliberately has built his neighborhoods to include housing options that are at a wide diversity of price ranges. So he has little homes with, lofts. He's got, little ranch homes with small yards and nice amenities on the inside, for your retired folks. He's got big family homes on big lots. Lots of places to run around if you got kids. And he does all of that because he wants the people living in the neighborhood not to all come from the same, income class. He wants to have houses that, better off people can buy, and that first time, your first time home buyer who's a fireman, he and his wife and his little baby, that they can afford a home, or that, a senior citizen can be there, or a young yuppie, that wants to have their hip little business, on the first floor, and then a loft apartment above. So he's doing that because he sees diversity as a mark of the coming kingdom. And so in all of those ways, Perry Bigelow at Bigelow Homes, has tried to actually design his business and his product around imagining, what might neighborhoods look like in the life of the age to come in the New Jerusalem. And it was just fascinating listening to that, and delightful walking around that community. I mean, it was clear to me why it would have won Builder of the Year. I mean, I was thinking, if it wasn't Chicago, it's so darn cold in winter, I'd live there.
Wow. And I think people, when they look on the news and they see the lack of diversity and the hatred and all of those things, it's easy to kind of feel like there's nothing I can do about it, that this just kind of is the way it is. But then you see somebody like Perry, who is not only advocating for, but that he is actually doing it. I mean, he's actually cultivating diversity, because this is what he sees the kingdom being like. And it may not mean that you necessarily need to go and buy like an apartment complex or something like that. But I just heard a very simple example of this particular, if you're wanting to cultivate diversity, for example, in your company, which ultimately would then spill over to your community, there in your meetings. Like, let's say that you're leading a management meeting, and he was saying that typically, at your conference table, half sits on one side, half sits on the other side, and the kind of silos of the departments, they kind of sit together in the meetings. And he said, what we did one meeting is we went in there, and I told my guys to sit in every other seat. so that the other team that came in would have to sit in between. And they walked in thinking, and they were about to go into a negotiation, and they walked in and just kind of dumbfounded. But he said that was the best negotiation session they had ever had, because they were prepared to think in a diverse way, and not just kind of in their own
Yeah. Yeah.
silos of experience. But just looking for those practical things. Amy, as we wrap it up here, what would be a parting piece of advice that you would like to leave with our listeners about how they can do this in their own sector?
I think it would be that I think we think best when we're kind of, sitting around a table of food with a handful of people, and we're bouncing stuff off to each other. And so to get together with other people in your same sector, so, if you're an architect, get together with some other architects. If you're a real estate agent, get together with some other real estate agents. Get together with some people that are in the same, businesses as you, and who share your desire to, really live into this robust vision of discipleship and joining the story of God, this story of working for the renewal of all things, and ask each other questions about these things. What do you think the creational intent of real estate was? Where do you think the idolatries and corruptions are in the in the healthcare field or in the educational field? What would you imagine an engineer doing in the new heaven and new earth? Asking these sorts of questions, and and pair it with some good food, and pray and think and talk and discuss about these things together, and sort of spur one another on, towards love and good deeds. I think we can really spark some good creative ideas when we do that sort of thing, and we need to do it intentionally, and if you don't know other people in your field, well, start looking for them, make that effort. But I think those sorts of kind of in-sector dialogues can be really helpful.
I love that. And our listeners know that that's what this show is about. It's about helping you to disciple individuals, your company, and ultimately your industry. Because I don't think we can disciple nations until we disciple our industries, which are a subset of that. And so if you are interested, as a listener, if you're interested in getting together with other people in your sector, this is kind of a call an audible right here, but contact me through theologyofbusiness.com or Darren at hybridgebooks.com, and we'll help you get connected with other people in your industry so you can begin to have these conversations. Do you have any other ideas on is there another place where people can come, Amy, to engage in that dialogue?
I'm working with a group called Made to Flourish. It's a collection of pastors, but it's a very robust website, and there's a lot of good stuff on there, including articles and thinking about how churches can promote this sort of dialogue. For example, taking a semester and organizing your small groups, in this kind of way, so that people can get to know each other and have these sorts of conversations right within in the congregation. That's one place. And then actually here out of the University of Virginia, there's a very interesting thing called the Thriving Cities Project. And the Thriving Cities Project offers a framework for thinking about dialogue, and it's a little bit different because instead of being organized particularly by, say, engineering versus architecture or whatever, it's organized by a slightly different framework that they call the 6 community endowments. And in each of these endowments, they call them the good, the beautiful, the true, the just and well-ordered, the sustainable, and the prosperous. And if you go on their website, you'll get a little description of those 6 domains. And the idea is that there are a number of industries that are in each of those domains. And so another way of sort of organizing this conversation is to gather people together who are kind of all primarily involved in one particular domain, and then having the same sort of conversation. So those would be two places I think of resource on this kind of topic.
Beautiful. I'll link up to those in the show notes. And what's the best place for people to hear more from you, Amy?
Right now, I would say it's probably the Made to Flourish site. That's the primary kind of place that I'm writing for these days. I do have an older website, Center on FIC.org, which stands for Center on Faith and Communities.org. The Center on Faith and Communities is the little division within Sagamore that I run. So some of my older stuff is there, but I actually am very non-techy, and I lost my webmaster, so it's rather outdated. So people can go there and see some stuff, but for my more contemporary stuff, probably the Made to Flourish website, which is just madetoflourish.org, is probably the best place.
Great. We'll link up to that as well. Amy, thank you so much for being so generous with your time and your expertise, and may God continue to bless everything you put your mind to. And we certainly continue to pray for your city and for our nation and for the healing, and just that God would continually stir our hearts to cultivate his creational intent to restore that institutional set rightness and imagine what things will be like in the age to come, and let that just infuse the way we go about our work and our lives.
Well, thank you. It's been a fun conversation. I appreciate it.
Hope you've enjoyed this episode. You can share your feedback and get more information to help you partner with God in business and disciple your coworkers, your company, and your industry at theologyofbusiness.com. The Theology of Business podcast is sponsored by Airlift Marketing. It's a noisy world out there, and at the same time, it's never been easier to reach a highly specific group of people with your message, product, service, or cause. Through website development, social media management, podcast management, pay-per-click advertising campaigns, and branding, Airlift Marketing helps businesses, nonprofits, and authors to reach their target groups with precision and get the highest return possible on their investments in marketing. Reach out to us at airliftmarketing.com to schedule a free 15-minute marketing strategy consultation. Thanks for listening, and keep partnering with God in your business.